She spent $46.25 on a dying dog, what he became. In a quiet town buried by snow and silence, a girl heard a whisper in the feed store. "They're auctioning off the last service dogs next week. Most of them are beyond help." But one pair of eyes haunted her, and when she found him, skin and bones, one ear drooped, something inside her broke. And then something incredible began to heal. What started as a rescue would become a revolution. And it all began with one word: echo. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's about trauma, healing, and the moment a forgotten life decided to fight back with one girl who refused to give up. What happened next would silence every doubt and start something no one saw coming. The wind in Frost Haven didn't whistle. It sighed, like the tired lungs of a town too old to hope and too stubborn to leave. The streets cracked under frostbite that never quite melted, and even in late March, the trees stood bare, as if spring had learned not to bother returning. 10-year-old Nina Carter pressed her cheek to the icy school bus window, fogging it with every quiet breath. Her town passed in slow-motion rows of closed shops, warped for sale signs, and the crumbling lumber mill at the edge of town that once kept every family afloat, including hers. The Carter house sat near the outskirts, tucked behind a row of wind-beaten pines. The porch sagged in the middle, and the chimney leaned just slightly left, like it was listening to something the rest of the house refused to hear. Inside, Nina moved like she was afraid to wake something, maybe the past. She dropped her backpack with a soft thud and went straight to the living room bookshelf. Not to grab a toy or a snack, but a battered coffee tin, rusted around the seams and dented like it had been through a war. She cradled it the way others might, a music box or photograph. Inside the tin were $46.25 in crumpled bills, faded birthday money, a few coins still sticky with gum from odd jobs around the neighborhood. But it was more than money. It was her father's last gift. Daniel Carter had once trained police dogs for the county K-9 unit. There was a time before the heart attack when dogs obeyed his whisper and officers lined up for his insight. Nina had watched him work from the hayloft in their barn, her legs swinging, her heart steady, believing in magic because he made it look real. When he died, the town sent flowers, but dogs don't send condolences. They just wait at the back door for someone who's never coming back. So Nina kept the tin and the memory, and the ache. Her mother, Lena, moved quietly through the kitchen, still in her waitressing uniform. The stain on the apron was new. The weariness on her face was not. She worked nights now, waitressing, studying online for her nursing degree. Grief didn't excuse the bills. "Nina, honey, there's leftover casserole in the fridge," Lena said, brushing her hair back into a loose knot. "I've got to leave for class soon." Nina nodded, already sitting cross-legged on the rug, the tin in her lap. She opened a weathered notebook and started writing like she always did when the house got too quiet. On the first page, still smudged with her dad's handwriting, were the words, "Training begins with trust." She didn't know what she was training for now, but it felt like something. Outside, the sky threatened snow. Again, she could feel it in her bones. Frost Haven didn't just freeze your fingers, it froze your future. But Nina refused to believe her father's legacy would end here, in silence, in the brittle stillness of an unfinished life. The next day, something shifted. Not big, just enough. After school, Nina stopped at the general store to buy a roll of tape for her notebook. She walked slowly past the community board by the register, the one with curling papers for lawn mowers, tutoring, or missing cats. That's when she heard the voice. "Did you hear? They're auctioning off the dogs from that shut-down training place." It was Mrs. Mallory, the bakery owner, speaking to a customer over a sack of flour. "Some of those dogs were nearly done with certification, poor things," she added. "But once the funding ran out, well, they've got no use for broken animals." Nina didn't move. Her heart thudded once, then twice. Dogs. Auctioned. She paid for the tape and walked home like the ground had become unfamiliar. That night she didn't reach for cartoons or her dad's old flannel hoodie. She reached for the notebook. Page 17. A dog doesn't listen to your words. It listens to your silence. She sat on her bedroom floor, surrounded by scribbled diagrams and dog sketches. Her father's handwriting blurred with her own. Outside, the snow started falling again. Not loud, just that whispery kind that looks pretty until it piles up and buries what was left. She couldn't sleep. Something in her chest felt like it was pacing, restless. She opened the coffee tin and counted the money again, $46.25. Enough? She didn't know, but her heart was louder than the question. The next morning, over breakfast, Nina tried to sound casual. Her spoon stirred the cereal that had long gone soggy. "Mom, there's an auction on Saturday. Dogs from that old training place." Lena glanced up, startled. "Dogs?" "Yeah. Mrs. Mallory said they're rehoming them. I thought maybe we could go, just to look." Lena sighed. "Sweetheart, we can't take on a dog. You know that. Vet bills alone." "I don't want to get one," Nina said quickly, though her fingers clutched the tin tighter under the table. "I just want to see." There was a long pause. Lena saw the set of her daughter's jaw, so much like Daniel's when he was focused. She softened. "Okay," she said finally, "just to look. And only because it's Saturday and I don't have a double shift." Nina nodded, but something inside her already knew. She wouldn't be coming back empty-handed. Not this time. The bell above the general store door jingled with the soft fatigue of a town that had learned not to rush. Nina stepped inside, pulling her scarf tighter against the March wind that had chased her all the way down Maple Lane. The warmth of the store wrapped around her like a familiar old quilt. Faint cinnamon from the spice rack, a hint of motor oil near the counter, and somewhere the sweet yeast of Mrs. Mallory's fresh brioche still lingering on her coat. She wasn't there for anything important, just tape for her notebook. Maybe a piece of bubble gum if her leftover lunch money allowed. But as she wandered the narrow aisles, a voice floated over from the front, hushed, tinged with that tone adults used when talking about things they thought children shouldn't hear. "You heard about the dog auction, right?" said Mrs. Mallory, her voice as soft as her famous sourdough rolls. "The one out near County Line?" another woman asked. "Mm-hmm. That training facility, the one that was supposed to supply seizure-alert dogs to the hospitals? It shut down last fall, lost all their funding. Now they're liquidating. Animals, equipment, everything." Nina froze beside the canned vegetables, the roll of tape still in her hand. "Shame," Mrs. Mallory continued. "Some of those dogs were almost ready, too. Trained better than most people I know. But once the money's gone—" Her voice trailed off. The other woman clicked her tongue. "They'll be put down if no one bids, won't they?" There was silence, a kind that said too much. Nina didn't breathe. She didn't remember walking to the counter, didn't hear the clink of coins or the thank you. Her body moved, but her mind stayed behind, back in that moment, holding on to the image she hadn't seen, a line of dogs waiting for someone to care before the clock ran out. That night, the wind howled louder than usual against the old farmhouse windows, as if even it sensed the ache building inside her chest. Nina sat cross-legged on the rug in her room, the rusted coffee tin beside her, her father's old training notebook open in her lap. Its leather edges were soft now, almost velvety from years of touch, and the corners curled like it had been waiting to be held again. She flipped to a clean page. March 3rd. Some dogs aren't broken. They've just been trained not to hope. Nina. She stared at the sentence for a long time, then added another. And some people, too. A single tear dropped onto the page. She didn't brush it away. Let it soak in. In the hallway, she could hear her mother moving, the low clink of dishes, the hum of the dishwasher, the tired cough she always tried to stifle at night. Lena Carter was made of muscle memory and scraped knuckles, a woman too strong to admit she was running on empty. Nina closed the gently and pulled the tin into her lap. $46.25. She counted it again, slower this time. Every coin had a story. The dollar from helping Mrs. Kipling with her groceries, the quarters from cleaning the sheriff's windows, the crumpled 5 from her last birthday. Each piece was a fragment of time she had turned into something that mattered. Could it be enough to save a life? The next morning over breakfast, Nina stirred her oatmeal but didn't eat it. The steam rose and disappeared. She stared at it like it might give her courage. "Mom," she said, keeping her voice even, "there's an auction this weekend." Lena looked up from her laptop, bleary-eyed from night classes. "What kind of auction?" "Dogs. From the training facility that closed down." Lena raised a brow. "Training facility?" "They trained dogs for kids with seizures and things like that. But it shut down, and now the dogs have to be sold. Or else—" She stopped, unable to say the word. Put down felt like a betrayal of silence. Lena set her coffee down. "Sweetheart, I just want to go," Nina said quickly. "Just to look. Please." Lena's face softened, but only a little. "You know we can't get a dog right now, Nina. We can't afford vet bills, not even food on some weeks." "I know." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "But I still want to go. Maybe they just need help. Maybe I don't know. Just see." Lena sighed, leaning back in her chair. "You have your dad's heart, you know that?" Nina looked down. That man could never walk past a stray without making it family. He'd bring home limping raccoons if he thought they needed a second chance. She stood and brushed her hand through her daughter's hair, thumb grazing the edge of Nina's ear like she used to when she was little. "If I drop you off, you stay with someone we know. Mrs. Mallory's niece is working concessions there. You stay with her. And you don't bid on anything. Promise me." Nina hesitated. "I promise I'll just look." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. That night, as the house settled and the wind returned to whispering, Nina slipped out of bed and knelt beside her window. She stared up at the moonlight painting soft lines across the barn roof. Somewhere out there, maybe under a metal pen or curled on cold concrete, there was a dog waiting for someone to believe in him again. And maybe, just maybe, he was waiting for her. Saturday morning came like a whisper. No sun, just clouds the color of steel wool and a breeze sharp enough to carry through bone. Frosthaven's fairgrounds sat at the edge of town like something forgotten, an open field ringed by rusted bleachers, splintered fencing, and old hopes packed into wooden crates. Nina stood near the animal pens, heart drumming in her chest, the coffee tin heavy in her backpack. Her breath fogged in front of her lips, disappearing as quickly as her certainty. She shouldn't be here. She knew that. But something inside her, something louder than reason, had refused to stay home. Dogs barked and whined from a series of metal enclosures at the far end. Most were alert, pacing or wagging excitedly as people passed. A golden retriever yipped at a toddler. A Labrador licked the fingers of a woman crouching by the gate. They were beautiful, well-fed, eager, full of that desperate willingness to please. But Nina wasn't looking for perfect. She kept walking, scanning past the main pens until she spotted it, a small enclosure set apart from the rest, shadowed by the wall of the auction barn. Inside lay a German shepherd, or what was left of one. His ribs pressed so close to his skin they looked like they might tear through. His coat, once thick and regal, was faded and patchy, clinging to his frame in desperate tufts. One ear stood straight, the other flopped over like it had given up trying. And yet, his eyes, not wild, not pleading, just quiet, amber-colored, distant, not empty, but not waiting either, like he had waited once, a long time ago, and no one had come. Nina stepped closer. The metal bars of the pen were cool beneath her fingertips. She didn't speak. She just knelt there, the gravel pressing through her jeans, and watched him. A volunteer walked by with a clipboard and paused. "That one's a waste," she said, not cruelly, just tired. "Returned twice, failed out of the service program, seizures, trauma, doesn't respond to anything anymore, hasn't eaten properly in days." "What's his name?" Nina asked, her voice barely above the wind. The volunteer checked her clipboard. "Used to be Rex, then Jasper, then nothing. Now we just call him Echo, because he doesn't answer to anything but silence." Echo. Nina didn't move. The dog didn't either. But his gaze shifted just a fraction, just enough to let her know he knew she was there, and that he didn't expect her to stay. The auction began shortly after. A line of folding chairs sat in front of a makeshift stage, a man in a tan vest, Mr. Acker. The auctioneer stepped up with a booming voice that didn't quite fit the solemn weight of the morning. "All right, folks, let's find some homes for these fine companions. These dogs are trained or near-trained. A steal if you know what you're doing." One by one, the younger, healthier dogs were led up. $600, $800. One retriever fetched $100 to $200. The bids came fast, people nodding or raising their paddles with quiet confidence. Nina sat on a hay bale in the back row, her fingers curled tightly around the tin hidden inside her coat. Her knees bounced. Her heartbeat thudded louder with each sale. Her palms felt like they were on fire. And then, lot number 43, German Shepherd. Approx. 3 years old. Some health complications. Failed certification twice. Not recommended for first-time owners. 2 handlers practically dragged him forward. Echo's legs buckled once. He didn't resist. He just stumbled and stood there, too weak to even shake. The crowd fell silent. Mr. Acker cleared his throat. "We'll start at $100. Nothing. $75? Silence. Nina stood. She didn't know she'd done it until every eye in the barn turned to her. "I have $46.25, she said. Her voice shook once. Then didn't. Mr. Acker blinked. "Miss, that's not how this works. It's all I have." Someone in the back snickered. A woman whispered to her husband, "She's just a kid." But Nina didn't sit down. She walked forward, pulled the tin from her coat, and unscrewed the lid. "I know what he looks like," she said, voice steadier now. "But I also know what dogs like him can be. My dad, Daniel Carter, he trained dogs for the K-9 unit. He used to say, 'The dogs that are hardest to reach are the ones worth reaching for.'" There was a shift in the crowd. Recognition. Mr. Acker rubbed his jaw, glancing toward the handlers. "You're saying this dog, this reject, is worth $46.25? Nina looked at Echo. His head had dipped low, eyes half-lidded. But when she stepped closer, he looked at her. This time, not through her. At her. "I'm saying he's worth trying for." The barn fell silent again, but this time it was reverent. Mr. Acker sighed almost gently. "Going once." At $46.25, going twice. The wind rattled the barn door. "Sold," he said quietly, "to the girl in the back." The old Chevy rattled as it pulled up near the fairgrounds gravel lot. Its heater wheezed against the cold, and the engine didn't so much idle as cough intermittently like a smoker trying to pretend they'd quit. Lena Carter sat behind the wheel, fingers drumming anxiously against the steering wheel as she scanned the thinning crowd. The sun had dropped lower than she liked. She hated driving at dusk. Everything turned flat colors, shadows, judgment. She hadn't expected to be picking up her daughter from an animal auction of all places, but when Mrs. Mallory's niece called, saying, "You need to come now," something inside her had already braced. She spotted her daughter before she saw the dog. Nina stood near the edge of the pen area, her backpack clutched tight in front of her like a shield. Her cheeks were red, her hair wind-tangled. But her eyes, that was what stopped Lena. Those eyes weren't her daughter's. They were Daniel's. Lena threw the car into park and stepped out. "Nina," she called, voice caught between frustration and fear. "What did you do?" "I bought him." Lena stopped mid-step. "You what?" Nina pointed behind her. Two teenage volunteers were wheeling out an old flat rolling cart, and on top of it, wrapped in a fleece blanket and barely lifting his head, was the dog. Echo. Lena's stomach dropped. He didn't look like a dog so much as the outline of one. Fur in patches, ribs like prison bars, a slow, labored breath that made his chest rise like it hurt. His left eye was crusted. One ear stood, the other wilted. He didn't even flinch at the sound of the cart rattling over gravel. "You used your money?" Lena asked, stunned. "All of it," Nina said, proud and scared all at once. "He was going to be put down. No one wanted him." A long silence followed. Lena pressed her fingers to her temple and exhaled. She wanted to scream, wanted to snap Nina out of this thing, this need to carry the weight her father left behind. They couldn't afford dog food, let alone vet bills. They barely had enough heat in the house. And now she was bringing home this? But when Lena looked back at her daughter, the words withered. Because behind all that stubbornness and fire there was something softer, something breaking and holding on at the same time. And Lena had seen that look once before, years ago, when Daniel stood in the middle of a storm with a half-drowned German shepherd pup in his arms, whispering, "She's more than what they think she is." She hadn't believed him then either. That pup became Kira, their family's first trained therapy dog. The ride home was quiet, but not peaceful. Nina sat in the back seat with Echo, the blanket tucked around him like a hospital sheet. He lay motionless, head in her lap, eyes half-lidded but still watching. Something, or remembering, maybe both. The town passed by outside empty sidewalks, flickering porch lights, an old gas station that hadn't updated its prices in years. Frost Haven had a way of looking like a place between places, where everything either started late or ended early. Lena gripped the steering wheel harder than she meant to. Her knuckles were pale, her jaw clenched. She didn't trust herself to speak. Nina did, though, softly. She started humming. It wasn't a song on the radio or anything a 10-year-old should remember. It was a tune her father used to whistle in the barn, barely more than a few drifting notes. He'd play it when a dog was anxious, when the wind howled, when Nina was too little to know why her chest felt heavy. Just a slow, 3-note rhythm. Rising, falling, settling. Echo twitched, only slightly, just a flick of one paw. But to Nina, it was enough. She kept humming. Lena's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. She saw her daughter, lips barely moving, fingers gently resting on the dog's sunken shoulder. The scene felt like something pulled from a dream. A soft ache she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the funeral. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to ask what Nina was thinking, to demand how she planned to feed him or medicate him or keep herself from falling apart when he didn't get better. But instead, she asked quietly, "What did you name him?" Nina didn't look up. "His name's Echo." Lena frowned. "Why?" "He doesn't answer to anything else," Nina said. "But when I said that, he looked at me." Silence returned. Outside, the last of the gray daylight dimmed. A deer darted across the road, and Lena slowed, watching it disappear into the pine shadows. Finally, she spoke, softer than before. "He's not going to make it, Nina. I know. He could die before morning. I know." "Then why?" Nina looked up. Her face wasn't defiant, it was something else entirely. Certain. Because he didn't stop trying, even when everyone else gave up on him. Echo shifted again, barely noticeable. His head nestled deeper into Nina's lap. His tail gave a single slow thump against the seat, and Lena knew there'd be no undoing this. The barn had been asleep since the funeral. Daniel's boots still sat by the door, the leather curled and cracked from weather and time. A leash hung on the rusted nail just inside the entrance, looped the same way he used to tie it, with a double twist and thumb knot. The air smelled of dry wood, old hay, and memories that hadn't been touched in over a year. Lena stood in the doorway with a broom and a sigh. The last time she'd stepped foot in here, it was spring. Now the world outside was brittle with early frost, and the boards groaned like they recognized her return. "Just sweep the corners," she muttered to herself. "Clear out the space, that's all." But when she moved the first bale of straw, she found something unexpected. A set of small paw prints, faded in the dirt near the back wall. Like something had waited a while, and then stopped waiting. Nina came out 15 minutes later with Echo bundled in a blanket, cradled in a plastic sled they used in winter to haul firewood. He didn't lift his head. He hadn't since the car ride. But his eyes stayed open, amber and still. She pulled the sled slowly across the grass, the plastic scraping faintly. Lena watched from the barn door as her daughter paused halfway and knelt, brushing snow from Echo's ears. "He hates the wind," Nina said. Lena didn't know how she knew that, but she nodded and opened the door wider. Together they cleared the old feeding corner, the one Daniel used to call the quiet zone. It still had the dent in the wall where Kira had slammed into it during training drills, and the frayed rope chew toy hanging from a beam above. They swept out the straw, beat dust from the old dog bed, laid a wool blanket down, folded the edges under. Then Nina settled Echo into the spot like it was sacred. And in her eyes, it was. That night, While Lena reheated leftovers in the kitchen, Nina curled beside Echo on the floor, her back against the cold barn wall. A battery-powered lantern cast a low circle of gold around them. The rest of the barn remained in shadow. She opened her father's notebook. Page 5. If a dog goes still, don't match its silence with noise. Match it with patience. She cleared her throat and began reading aloud. It wasn't poetry. Not really. It was dry and practical. Daniel's notes on response cues, scent sensitivity drills, anxiety training thresholds. But the words had weight, like a language she was only just now learning how to speak out loud. Echo didn't respond. He didn't move. But Nina swore, once or twice, that his ear twitched, that his chest rose a little deeper, that something ancient and buried flickered for half a second behind those amber eyes. Lena stood at the kitchen window, the glow from the barn barely visible across the yard. She rubbed her arms, not from cold, but from unease. She couldn't keep letting Nina believe this would work, that some rusted notebook and candlelight would undo whatever had broken that dog. That night, when Nina finally came inside, Lena pulled her aside. "He didn't eat again," she said gently. Nina looked down. "I know. He hasn't stood up, hasn't responded. Nina, maybe it's time to talk to Dr. Harwin." Nina's voice cracked. "You mean to put him down?" Lena winced at how blunt it sounded aloud. "I mean," she said carefully, "to make sure he isn't suffering. You've done more than anyone would have tried, but he's gone inside himself, sweetheart. Sometimes animals do that, and they don't come back." Nina didn't answer. She just nodded and turned toward the stairs. But later that night, Lena passed by her bedroom door and found her curled on the floor again, this time with the notebook under her cheek like a pillow. The pages fluttered with the heater's draft, resting open on a line written in Daniel's familiar slanted script. "Even ghosts respond to kindness. If you wait long enough, they remember who they used to be." The next morning, Echo still hadn't moved. Nina offered scrambled eggs, then boiled chicken. She sat with him for over an hour, whispering things no one else could hear. He blinked occasionally, but otherwise he remained a statue built from fur and fatigue. That afternoon, Lena picked up the phone. She dialed the vet's number, got as far as, "Yes, this is Lena Carter. I'm calling about a German shepherd we recently—" But then she looked out the window. Nina had laid her hand over Echo's chest. Her lips were still moving, reading softly. And though Echo didn't stir, Lena saw something shift. Nina's eyes weren't full of hope anymore. They were full of something deeper. Faith. She hung up before the receptionist could return. That night, the frost came hard. The windows iced over. Lena brought an extra blanket out to the barn. Didn't say a word, just draped it over Nina's shoulders and walked back to the house. She didn't call the vet again. Not yet. The third morning came with silver fog. It rolled low across Frosthaven like breath held too long. The barn, barely visible from the kitchen window, looked less like a structure now and more like a memory preserved in frost. Inside it, silence reigned. Nina sat cross-legged beside Echo. Her fingers were red with cold, her hair messy from sleep. She hadn't returned to her bed once since they brought him home. In front of her, Echo remained curled in the same hollow he'd carved in the straw. Still breathing, still distant. His ribs rose and fell like slow waves. But his eyes no longer followed her voice. She had read every page of her father's notebook twice, some aloud, some just in her head. She had tried chicken broth, cheese cubes, warm compresses for his legs. Nothing worked. Today her hands shook more than usual as she flipped through the battered pages again. A corner of one sheet nearly torn off slid free. Something about it felt different. It wasn't part of the training section. It was scribbled hastily, ink smudged at the edge like it had been written during rain. She held it up to the lantern, her father's handwriting crooked, rushed. Some dogs are so loyal they forget how to respond, unless they hear their first command again. Nina stared at the sentence for a long time. It didn't make sense until it did. Echo had once been a service dog trainee. She'd read the reports, failed out twice, too slow, too reactive, prone to seizures, but the wording was always vague. One phrase repeated, non-compliant at verbal cue, possible imprint on specific handler. A specific handler. Her father? She knelt down beside Echo and whispered softly. Sit, she said. Nothing. Down. Nothing. Stay. His ear flicked once, but no lift of the head. She tried more words from the notebook, commands she'd seen her father use when training Kira, commands used in military drills, in scent detection, even agility competitions. Alert. Track. Heel. Target. Brace. Echo's tail twitched once. Just a twitch, but still no movement from his head. Nina bit her lip, frustration mounting behind her ribs. She flipped back to her notebook. Her fingers brushed a dog-eared page from a story her father used to tell her before bed. The first time he met Kira, his prized K9. I didn't choose her. She responded when I said one word. Her breath caught. What was the word? She closed her eyes, thinking back. Her father, crouched in the yard, his voice low and steady. That day he let her give her first command as a child, her tiny voice full of pride, yelling across the field to the shaggy shepherd. She couldn't remember what she'd said, but she remembered the way Kira had leapt forward, the way her father smiled. Her eyes opened slowly, and in the lantern light, she looked at Echo again. His face hadn't changed, but something in the air had. She took a deep breath, not loud, not commanding, just remembering. And then she said it. Echo, guard. The barn didn't move, the wind didn't shift, but Echo did. His ears lifted slowly, shakily like rising from sleep that had lasted too long. And then his head turned. His eyes found hers, not vacant, not hollow, alive. For a long second, neither of them moved. Nina's throat tightened. Echo blinked once. His breathing steadied. And then, gently, he pushed his front paw forward across the straw. Nina gasped. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Lena stood at the edge of the barn, having come to bring a blanket, but the blanket slipped from her arms as she saw it. Her daughter, sitting in the straw, whispering "guard," again and again through tears. And that dog, half-starved, half-forgotten, was leaning toward her, not fully, not strong, but present. There. Lena didn't say a word, just stepped back from the door and quietly wiped her face. That night, Nina wrote a new note in the back of the training manual. He remembered. He just needed the right word. He needed to be called back. And in the margin, she drew a tiny paw print. Beside it, she wrote, Echo heard me. The rain came slow that morning, tapping against the windows like soft-knuckled knocks from the past. Lena stood in the kitchen, staring at the steam curling above her mug. The smell of coffee reminded her of Daniel, just enough to hurt, not enough to comfort. From the barn, she could hear faint movements. No barking, no commands, just the quiet shuffle of straw and the creak of a girl determined not to give up. By the time she joined Nina out there, the barn had changed. It wasn't just cleaner, it was different. The old posts Daniel once used for scent drills were upright again. A faded target mat hung back on the wall. There was a blanket over Echo's straw bed neatly folded, the corners tucked just right. And Echo, still fragile, was sitting now, not lying, not collapsed. His eyes followed Nina like shadows track light. Lena didn't interrupt. She simply handed her daughter a thick, leather-bound notebook, Daniel's old service dog training manual. Its corners were curled, edges worn from years in the field. Nina held it with reverence. "Do you think he ever trained a seizure-alert dog?" Lena hesitated, lips pressed tight. "I don't know. He was secretive sometimes, especially after the promotion. Some of the dogs weren't standard assignments." They opened the book together, page by page. The first half was familiar obedience tiers, task-response mapping, early scent imprinting, but halfway through, the notes changed. Daniel's handwriting turned sharper, more compressed. The margins were filled with scribbles and abbreviations. Pre-ictal triggers, spatial hold during tremor, pulse detection under 50 BPM. "Look at this," Nina whispered, running her finger along a phrase boxed in red ink. "Project SAD, Seizure Alert Dogs, funded via Health Shield and Pharmagene." Lena leaned closer. "That's not municipal work. That's private contract." Nina frowned. "Why wouldn't he tell us?" Beneath the heading, Daniel had scribbled a list of ID codes. No names, just dogs assigned to numbers, and next to one line, GS07B, male, nonverbal alert, strong pair bond, incomplete program, pending reassignment. Nina whispered aloud, "German Shepherd, 7, B." She looked up at Echo. "B for beta or backup?" Echo's ears flicked. Later that evening they returned to the house. Nina carried the notebook pressed against her chest like a relic. In the study, Daniel's old corner room dust had taken over. His desk still held a broken mug with faded paw prints and 3 dried pens. "Help me open it?" Nina asked softly, pointing to the bottom drawer. It didn't budge. Lena tried the key from the filing cabinet. No luck. She sighed, reaching for the toolbox. But Nina paused. "Wait." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something rusted, a keychain Daniel once gave her for a birthday when she was 6. "For all the things you'll unlock," he'd said, half laughing. She'd kept it ever since, thinking it only fit her diary. But now she wondered. She slid the tiny key into the lock. Click. The drawer opened. Inside were 3 items: a sealed manila envelope, a cassette tape labeled 07B, Session 5, and a photo. The photo showed Echo, younger, healthier, standing tall beside Daniel, both looking in the same direction toward something out of frame. On the back, her father had written, "Quiet eyes don't mean an empty mind. He just listens better than most." Nina didn't realize she was crying until one of her tears landed on the paper. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was the evaluation. Dog ID GS07B. Name assigned Echo. Breed German Shepherd. Status high sensitivity seizure response. strong pre-ictal detection via scent and behavioral cues, mild reactivity under stress. Seizure susceptibility noted, needs quiet handler. Recommendation: discarded due to health risk, plus non-compliance with standard handler protocols. Transfer to behavioral euthanasia list. Lena gasped, her hand covering her mouth. He was going to be put down. Nina traced the underlined phrase. Needs quiet handler. Her voice cracked. That's why he didn't respond to the others, why he didn't pass. They wanted volume, repetition. She looked at her mother, trembling now. He needed someone who would whisper. That night they sat in the study with the cassette tape playing. It was grainy, hissing, but they could hear her father's voice. Echo. Watch. Pause. Echo. Settle. Silence. He senses it before we do. Almost every time. Another pause, softer now. He's not broken. He's just not built for noise. Nina leaned against Lena, Echo resting at her feet, curled in a tight crescent of breath and bone and memory. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. He wasn't a mistake. And for the first time, Lena didn't answer with caution or concern. She just nodded, slowly, her hand resting on her daughter's back. No, she said quietly. He was waiting for you to find him. The bowl sat untouched again. Chicken broth, softened kibble, bits of boiled carrot cut into perfect little squares just like Daniel used to do. Nina had even sprinkled a pinch of his old training blend on top parsley, turmeric, and a whisper of chicken powder. But Echo didn't move. His ribs pressed like piano keys against skin. His eyes blinked slowly, detached. His breath was shallow but steady, like someone waiting out a storm they couldn't see. Nina knelt beside the bowl, fingers trembling slightly as she stirred it. Come on, she murmured. You've got to want something. Echo turned his head away. Not in defiance. Just as if it didn't matter. From the barn door, Lena stood watching, arms crossed, heart aching. It had been 4 days since they brought him home. 4 days since she started counting ounces and tracking spoonfuls like it would somehow buy back time. Nina didn't cry. Not then. She only pressed her palms together like prayer and whispered toward him, You're not going anywhere. Not after what you've been through. Not after I found you. But Echo stayed still, a statue of tired flesh. Later that evening, Nina sat cross-legged on the barn floor, her father's old notebook in her lap. The lamp buzzed overhead. Outside, the wind scratched the walls like restless fingers. The barn still smelled faintly of smoke and rust, echoes of the past Daniel had built here, and the ghosts left behind. Her eyes skimmed pages she'd read a dozen times. Then she saw it. A margin note, faint, as if written in a hurry or in half-light. Dogs trained under trauma don't always respond to commands. Try non-directive cues tied to emotion. Use names, use tone, use intention. Sometimes the word isn't a command. It's a memory. Another line, boxed lightly in pencil. Nourish was GS-07B's intake trigger, used during pre-dawn sessions. Her breath caught. She turned to Echo, still curled, still silent. She knelt next to the untouched bowl and whispered, not loud, not pleading, just soft, like a lullaby spoken to no one but the night itself. Echo. She let the name hang in the air like a thread, then lower. Nourish. Echo didn't lift his head, but his nose twitched. Nina held her breath. He shifted barely, But it was there, the flicker of curiosity, a momentary crack in that wall of exhaustion and instinct. "Nourish," she whispered again, barely audible. "Please." Echo pushed his front paw forward, slowly, deliberately, like testing ground after a minefield. He nudged the bowl once, then a second time, and then he began to eat. Lena gasped in the doorway, hand rising to cover her mouth. Her body froze, but her eyes flooded fast and without warning. She didn't say anything, didn't dare break the moment. Nina didn't move either, just stayed on her knees, watching him chew in trembling bites, as if each one was a surprise to his own hunger. It was clumsy, hesitant, like muscle memory rebooting. But it was real. And Nina's heart swelled so quickly, it hurt. She blinked at Echo, wiping tears with the sleeve of her hoodie, voice cracking into a laugh that was half sob. "You remembered, didn't you?" Echo didn't look up, didn't wag, didn't react. But when the bowl was empty, he turned and leaned just barely until his side pressed softly against Nina's leg. A quiet touch, not of need, but of choice. That night they didn't return to the house. Nina laid an old quilt beside Echo's straw bedding. She brought out a pillow and her notebook. She didn't tell Lena she was staying. She didn't need to. The barn felt different now. Not fixed, not healed, but quieter, like something broken had exhaled for the first time. Echo curled beside her, his head resting near her foot. She opened the notebook again, but didn't write. Instead, she whispered stories. Little ones. About Daniel. About the time he accidentally spilled liver treats into the washing machine. About the way he used to hum when he cooked eggs. About the way he said Nina's name like it was already a promise. Echo's eyes stayed closed, but his ears shifted once. And Nina? She slept. Not the light, haunted kind she'd grown used to, the kind where her father died again each night in different ways, but a deep, steady sleep. Her cheek pressed into the pillow, Echo's breath a steady rhythm at her side. When Lena peeked in at dawn, she didn't call out. She just stood there, arms tucked around herself, watching. Two shapes, girl and dog, curled in the golden spill of morning light, no longer lost things, just two souls resting in the quiet after the storm. It was the soft, morning kind of quiet, the kind that hung like dew between breath and birdsong. Nina stepped backward, hands in front of her chest, palms open like her father had taught. Echo, heel. The German shepherd followed slowly, still limping, but more alert than he had been in weeks. His ears perked at the sound of her voice, even the flopped one twitching slightly. They were in the small patch of cleared earth behind the barn, Daniel's old drill space. Fence posts still leaned at odd angles. A cone with one bite mark sat where her dad used to shout commands to a line of rookie handlers. But today, it was just Nina and Echo. She carried Daniel's notebook in her hoodie pocket like a holy book. The pages had begun to feather with use, corners smudged from anxious fingers. She had memorized the drills, improvised when needed, but always circled back to his principles. No voice louder than your presence, no command stronger than your calm. "Echo," she said, gentler now. "Sit." He sat, slow but solid. She beamed. Then, down. His legs folded beneath him, eyes up, alert. "Good boy," she whispered, kneeling to scratch his chest. It was the first time he'd completed a full sequence without faltering. But the joy in her chest barely had time to bloom, because suddenly his body locked. A strange twitch rolled across his shoulder, then another. Then all of him convulsed. "Echo!" she gasped, reaching toward him. His jaw clenched tight, legs kicked, his torso seized in violent rhythm. His head thrashed once, then again, dust rising around him like startled ghosts. For half a second she froze. Then instinct. Daniel's notes. Page 12. Emergency response. Canine. She grabbed the stopwatch clipped to her belt loop, thumbed it into motion. "Echo, Echo, it's okay," she murmured, voice calm, grounded. "You're safe. I'm here. I've got you." She dropped to her knees, careful not to touch him. Hands hovered, heart pounding, but her voice stayed even. Lena burst from the house, apron still on. "Nina? What?" "Seizure," Nina shouted. "I've got it. Stay back." Lena froze in place, shock in her eyes. But something in her daughter's tone, steady, commanding, held her still. Echo's legs flailed once more, then his breathing hitched. 38 seconds, 40. Then the spasm slowed. Echo groaned low in his throat, a sad, hollow sound. Then stillness. Nina waited. 10 more seconds. Then crawled forward on her knees, slow, deliberate. She reached her hand under his jaw and stroked once, his fur damp with sweat and dust. "You're okay," she whispered. "It's over." Echo blinked. His chest rose and fell in heavy, dragging breaths. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, but they found her. She pressed her forehead gently to his. "You stayed," she whispered. "So I will too." Lena stepped forward now, slowly, like she was approaching something sacred. She looked at the stopwatch in Nina's hand, then at the dog panting, trembling, then back to her daughter. "You knew what to do," she said softly. Nina didn't respond. She just nodded, holding Echo's head in her lap. "You didn't even flinch." "Dad wrote it all down," Nina said. "I've been practicing, in case it ever happened." Lena dropped to her knees beside them, arms wrapping around them both. "You handled it better than I ever could have." Nina didn't say anything for a moment, then, "I was scared." "But you didn't let it show," Lena whispered. "That's the difference." They stayed like that until the sun had climbed higher, chasing the chill off the dirt. Echo tried to rise once, his legs shaky, back legs giving out. Nina helped guide him down gently again. "I think we rest today," she whispered, brushing the side of his ear. He blinked slowly in response, the faintest nudge of his nose into her hand. Lena reached out, brushing Nina's hair back from her face. "I see so much of him in you," she said, voice thin with emotion. Nina looked up. "Dad?" she nodded. "And something else, too." "What?" "Something he didn't have." Nina furrowed her brow. "Time," Lena said softly. "You still have time to become something even greater." They sat together in the warmth of the rising day, a girl, a mother, and a dog no one had wanted, but who had just proven he was still worth the fight. The classroom smelled faintly of markers and morning cereal, with that faint hum of kid chaos beneath the surface. Crinkling paper, sneaker scuffs, and the light patter of whispered side conversations. Mrs. Callahan stood at the whiteboard, back turned, looping cursive across it like a song few kids could read. And at the very back, Nina sat stiffly, one hand clutching the frayed leash of the dog curled under her chair. Echo didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't even blink from what she could tell. "Are you sure he'll be okay in here?" Mrs. Callahan had asked when they arrived. "Some of our students don't handle surprises well." "He doesn't startle easily," Nina had replied, her voice calm but small. "And he's working again." Mrs. Callahan raised an eyebrow at that, but said nothing more. Now it was show and tell. One of the few times the classroom dimmed its usual rules, letting in outside toys and treasures, stories about pet turtles and dead grandpas and the occasional mysterious rock that might have been from space, or the neighbor's driveway. Nina waited until the line shortened. Then she stood. Her hands shook slightly as she walked to the front, Echo trailing behind with that slow, deliberate gait of his, every step a decision. Whispers trailed them like a breeze. "Is that a wolf? Why's he so skinny? Look at his ear." "Okay, quiet down," Mrs. Callahan said, raising a hand. "Nina, go ahead." Nina took a breath, then another. "This is Echo," she began, her voice steadying. "He used to be a service dog in training. He didn't finish his program because of medical stuff, but I adopted him from an auction." Mrs. Callahan's brow lifted slightly. Echo sat beside her now, still and regal in his stillness. "He had seizures. He was really sick. But he still remembers things. Important things." A pause. Her fingers brushed his fur coarse and thinning in spots, but warm. "He's not just a dog. He's trained to notice things before people do, things you can't see." From the back row, a chair scraped. A boy let out a sharp gasp. Wyatt, 8 years old, big headphones, non-verbal. His aide, Mr. Donnelly, wasn't close enough yet. Wyatt's arms began to flap. A low whine built in his throat, rising in spirals. His face crumpled, breath quickened. A field trip had been canceled that morning. He hadn't understood why. And the noise in the room had been building. Nina turned. But Echo was already moving. No command, no hesitation. He slipped between desks like mist, careful and quiet. And then he sat, right in front of Wyatt. He didn't bark, didn't nudge, just placed himself like a wall, between Wyatt and the world. His body became a shield, solid, calm, present. Wyatt's hands stilled. He looked at Echo wide-eyed, startled but not afraid. The whine in his throat faded. The panic didn't vanish, but softened, like a storm rerouted. The room had gone silent. Even Mrs. Callahan, even Mr. Donnelly, now frozen near the bookshelf. Wyatt's fingers reached out, brushing Echo's ear. And Echo leaned in, just a little, allowing it. Nina didn't realize she was crying until she blinked and her vision blurred. Mrs. Callahan walked forward slowly, crouched beside her. "He wasn't told to do that, was he?" "No," Nina whispered. "He just knew." Nina nodded, wiping her cheek. Echo remained where he was, anchoring Wyatt with nothing more than his presence. Mrs. Callahan stood. Her voice, when she spoke again, was different, quieter, humbled. "Nina, he's not just recovering. He's working." Later, when the bell rang and the hallway erupted in its usual storm, Wyatt didn't bolt like he usually did. He waited for Echo. And as they exited the room, the shepherd glanced back just once, his flopped ear brushing against Wyatt's arm like punctuation. That night, as they walked home, Nina looked down at him. "You remembered what to do," she whispered. Echo didn't reply, but his tail thumped softly once against her jeans. And for the first time, she realized she hadn't brought him in to show the class what he could do. He had come to show her. The sky above Maple Hollow pulsed with celebration. It was the 4th of July, and the town had emptied into its Hart Hendrickson field, where generations came to remember how to be noisy and grateful at the same time. Smoky grills hissed. Kids with face paint ran in dizzying loops. Flags waved from picnic tables like they were holding on for dear life in the breeze. Sparklers cracked against dusk. It was loud, crowded, unpredictable, and the kind of place Lena had spent weeks avoiding. But today, she stood at the edge of the field, fingers knotted around her purse strap, watching her daughter tug gently at the leash of a dog who hadn't flinched once all afternoon. "I'm still not sure about this," Lena said, the worry thin but sharp in her voice. Nina glanced up, calm and quiet. "He's ready." Echo padded beside her, steady on his feet, lean body relaxed but alert. His gait was controlled, measured, not the skittish stutter of the dog they'd once carried home like a dying shadow. Now, he walked like he remembered something. And maybe, Nina thought, he did. They weaved through a maze of picnic tables. Echo ignored the squealing toddlers, the sizzling from the corn booth, the clatter of overturned chairs. A firecracker popped somewhere near the parking lot. He didn't flinch. Lena caught up, watching closely. "Did you train him not to react to fireworks?" "No," Nina replied. "He just knows this isn't the danger." "Then what is?" Nina didn't answer, because just then Echo paused. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just paused, like a thought passing through him. His head turned. At the far end of the field, a boy stood alone near the cotton candy stand shoulders, stiff, fingers trembling slightly. Wyatt. He wasn't wearing his headphones. His aide, Mr. Donnelly, was distracted talking to a parent near the bandstand. No one had noticed the flicker in Wyatt's posture. No one but the dog. Nina's breath caught as Echo began moving quiet as breath. He reached Wyatt in 5 strides. No bark, no nudge, just presence. He placed himself directly in front of the boy, angled slightly, blocking out the swirl of kids running with sparklers behind them. Wyatt's breathing slowed. One hand reached down, fingertips brushing Echo's fur. And just like that, the panic passed before it could take shape. Lena had seen enough. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Nina." But her daughter was already walking toward them, slow and soft, like the air around them had changed. She crouched beside Echo, gently scratching his chest. "You did good, Thunder." He leaned into her touch, one ear flicking back at the nickname. Wyatt turned to look at her. His lips moved, and though no sound came, his eyes said everything: gratitude, safety, connection. They sat on the grass after that. Nina, Lena, Echo, and eventually Wyatt, who stayed curled near the dog, content to simply exist beside him. As the sky darkened and the first real fireworks launched overhead, Echo didn't move. Not when the red burst turned night to blood, not when the ground shook from the finale, not even when a baby wailed nearby. He remained calm, rooted, present, not guarding, not reacting, just choosing to stay. And for Lena, who once believed nothing broken could work again, it was a kind of miracle. Later, as they packed up, Lena whispered to Nina, "He passed your test." "It wasn't a test," Nina replied, brushing grass off her knees. "It was his world." Lena tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "This," Nina said softly, motioning around the noise, the chaos, the beauty. "This is where he was supposed to be. Not in a cage, not forgotten. Lena looked down at the dog, now resting at their feet. Maybe we were the ones who had to remember. It started with Wyatt. By Monday, people who never looked twice at the Hollis barn were slowing down as they passed. Some paused at the mailbox, pretending to check their phone. Others asked softly at the market, "Was that really the dog from the picnic?" By Wednesday, the phone rang, and again Thursday. "Hi, my son. He has trouble sleeping. I heard Echo helps calm kids. We're not asking for anything formal. We just wondered if he might come by for a visit. Does he work with adults, too? My sister, she lost her voice after the fire, but she loves dogs." Each voice different, each story fragile, like people had been waiting for a reason to believe again, and somehow it had 4 legs and a crooked ear. Inside the barn, Nina kept writing in the old notebook. New pages now. She drew lines like her dad used to. Observation, trigger, response, outcome. Echo didn't wear a vest, didn't need a badge, but each session, each visit, was logged like it mattered, because it did. On a pale Friday morning, as mist curled low over the fields, Lena stood by the screen door with the phone in hand, hesitating. It had taken her 3 tries to dial. "Hello?" The voice was gravel-warm, but aged like boots on dry leaves. "Hi, is this Officer Glenn?" "Retired a long time ago. Who's asking?" She swallowed. "Lena Hollis, Daniel's daughter." A pause, then, "Well now, that's a name I haven't heard in years." Lena closed her eyes. Would you come see something?" He didn't ask what. Didn't need to. They met him at the barn. He arrived in a tan truck that had seen better decades, stepping out slow but upright, his spine straight, his boots polished. Officer Glenn had once trained police dogs across 3 states. Rumor was he could tell more about a dog in 10 seconds than most folks learned in 10 years. He didn't smile much, didn't need to. Inside the barn, Echo stood near Nina, watching Wyatt trace shapes in the dirt with a stick. It was their second visit. This time, no meltdowns, no headphones, just quiet. Officer Glenn didn't speak. He walked once around the dog, watched, waited. Nina didn't look up from her notebook. Wyatt tapped the ground twice. Echo tilted his head. Then, without command, Echo lay down beside the boy, touching shoulder to shoulder. Wyatt smiled. Glenn finally exhaled. Then he looked at Lena. His voice broke like an old hinge. "Your father would have cried." That's all he said. But it was enough. Later, as they walked back to the house, Lena wiped her cheek quickly with the edge of her sleeve. "He didn't say much," she muttered. "He never does," Nina replied. "That's why it mattered." The wind shifted in the trees overhead. The old barn door creaked behind them just slightly. Lena paused. "Do you think this is what Dad meant?" "What do you mean?" "Some dogs are too loyal," Lena whispered. "They forget how to respond unless they hear the first command again." Nina stopped walking. "Maybe that command wasn't guard," Lena added. "Maybe it was stay in the fight, stay in the world." They looked back toward the barn, where Echo now stood alone still, upright, watching them, waiting, like a promise remembered. He arrived in a black car that didn't belong to this town, sleek, polished, foreign in a way that had nothing to do with license plates, the kind of car that moved without dust, that made no sound until it stopped right in front of the Hollis mailbox and idled like it owned the gravel. Nina watched from the porch. Echo was beside her, ears alert, not tense, not fearful, just listening. The door opened. The man who stepped out wore navy slacks and a white shirt too crisp for this heat. Not a wrinkle, not a crease out of place. His shoes weren't muddy. His hands didn't carry calluses. His smile was all teeth-friendly, wide but practiced. "Ms. Hollis?" he said smoothly, addressing Lena as she came out to stand in front of Nina, shielding without realizing. "Yes? I'm Dr. Julian Marlowe, National Director of the North Star Service Foundation." He held out a business card as if it were a golden ticket. "May I speak with you and your daughter?" The kitchen was still warm from biscuits. It didn't match the tone he brought in with his briefcase. Lena poured tea. Nina said nothing. Echo lay under the table, chin on paws, but eyes fixed unblinking on the man's every move. Dr. Marlowe placed a glossy folder between them. "I'll get straight to it," he began, folding his hands. "We've been following Echo's progress, through informal channels, of course. Your demonstration at the town picnic. It reached people." Lena blinked. "Demonstration?" He smiled gently. "Let's call it what it was. A miracle. A seizure-prone dog, twice failed by the system, now stabilizing others. It's the story people didn't know they needed." Nina stiffened. He opened the folder. Inside, documents, logos, photos, renderings of a state-of-the-art training facility, full scholarships, press cuttings, smiling children, smiling adults, clean halls and polished floors. "We want to help," he continued. "We'll fund a new barn, no, a full center. Resources, support, a future, and a scholarship, full tuition, any school, any state." He looked at Nina. "All we ask is to bring Echo into our program officially." Silence. The air in the room grew thinner. Lena's hand touched her daughter's. "Nina." But Nina didn't look at her. She looked only at Echo, at the fur still patchy in places, the scar near his hind leg, the one ear that never stood right, the dog who still twitched in his sleep, but woke up faster now, softer, steadier. He didn't move, didn't whine, didn't blink. But Nina felt it. "He chose me," she said. Marlowe raised an eyebrow. "And you're saying no to—" "I'm saying," Nina interrupted, "he's not a tool you trade for funding." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It was a storm disguised as a whisper. Lena tried to speak, then stopped. She looked at her daughter, not a little girl, not a child playing dog trainer, but someone who had stood beside a broken creature and refused to let him stay broken. Julian closed the folder slowly. "I won't pretend this wasn't expected," he said, rising. Then he paused at the door. "Just remember," he added, turning back with that same velvet tone, "sometimes the hardest choices aren't about love. They're about letting others benefit from it." Nina stood. "And sometimes," she replied, "the best choice is not giving up the one who gave you yourself back." Echo stood too, as if on cue, walking to her side. Marlowe hesitated. Then, with one final glance, he stepped outside into the waiting car. It drove off without dust. That night, Nina couldn't sleep. She sat in the barn beside Echo, the folder still in her hands. Unopened now, but heavy. Lena came in, leaned in the doorway. "You did good," she said. "I didn't feel brave." "You don't have to feel it," Lena said quietly. "To be it." Echo let out a long breath, shifting closer. "Besides," Lena added, smiling faintly, That man never once looked at Echo like a soul, just a symbol. Nina nodded. I'm not ready to give him to the world. Lena stepped forward and kissed the top of her daughter's head. Then don't, she said. Let the world come to him. The first car came on a Tuesday. It didn't pull into the drive, just slowed like it was lost, like it wanted to be sure of something. Then it rolled past the gate and disappeared down the hill. But by Friday, there were more. Different makes, different states, some old, some new, but always the same rhythm. Drive up, idle near the mailbox, and leave. Lena tried not to overreact. It's summer, she told herself aloud. People travel. Maybe they're looking for that peach farm up the road. But her voice didn't carry much conviction. The neighbors started noticing, too. Mrs. Mallory from the bakery stopped by with a sack of rolls and concern wrapped in a napkin. Saw a couple fellas near the west fence line, she said, eyes scanning the horizon. Didn't look local. Asked me about the dog with the scarred ear. Wanted to know who trained him. Lena tightened her grip on the basket. And what did you say? Mrs. Mallory narrowed her eyes. I said the dog's not theirs to ask about. That night, the phone rang again. Not a stranger this time. Mr. Coates from the feed store. Two folks came in asking if Echo was registered anywhere. Said they were researchers. One had a clipboard, the other had a camera. Researchers? Lena repeated. Funny thing, Coates said. Didn't buy a single thing. Nina didn't ask permission. She just went out to the barn, dug through her dad's old storage bench, and came back inside with a dust-covered wildlife camera. The one Daniel had used years ago to track deer movement near the northern ridge. It still had tape on the side marked Hollow Trail, 2014. That night she strapped it high in the eastern maple, its small red light blinking once like an eyelid closing. You think they'll come on foot? Lena asked, watching from the porch. I think, Nina said. They already have. Echo stood beside her, gaze fixed on the dark tree line. By morning, the camera held 12 clips. Most were nothing, just wind, bugs, a raccoon too curious for its own good. But one showed a figure, midnight, hooded, not close enough to breach the fence, but standing, watching, motionless, then turning back the way he came. Lena emailed the clip to Officer Glenn. His reply was one sentence. Lock everything and do not engage. He didn't need to say more. That evening, Lena installed new locks on the barn, while Nina sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, reading aloud from her dad's old notes. Echo lay nearby, eyes closed, but ears always moving. When Nina whispered, "Guard," Echo stood and moved to the door, not growling, just ready. Lena looked up from the padlock she was tightening. I don't think they're here to take pictures, she said. Nina nodded. I think they want to see how much of him still works. Later that night they dimmed the porch light, sat in silence. Lena wrapped her arm around Nina. The folder Dr. Marlowe left still sat untouched on the kitchen table, its glossy promises dulled by dust. In the distance, a car engine started, slow, then faded. Echo didn't bark, but he didn't lie down either. He stood at the window for hours, just watching. It started with a bark, a sound not heard in weeks, not like this, sharp, desperate, too fast, too wild, then another, and another. Nina jolted awake. The barn. Her heart knew before her eyes did. Through the bedroom window, light flickered, not golden, not soft, orange, Violent. Wrong. She was out of bed before her feet hit the floor, screaming, "Mom!" as she yanked on her boots with trembling fingers. But by the time Lena made it to the door, Nina was already in the yard, running toward the fire. The barn blazed like it had been waiting to die. Old wood, dry rope, stale hay, hungry flames climbed its frame like they'd always belonged there. But Echo's barks didn't come from outside. They came from inside. "Nina!" Lena's voice ripped across the field, hoarse with panic. But Nina was already at the threshold, arm over her nose, ducking low. The smoke stung instantly. Her eyes teared, her lungs fought. But all she saw was him. Echo stood in the far corner, teeth clenched around a canvas training bag, pawing desperately toward the doorway, dragging something heavy. "Echo!" she screamed, stumbling toward him. He didn't leave, didn't run, didn't even look up until she touched the strap of the bag. Only then did he release it, nudging her with a singed muzzle, as if to say, "This. Take this, not me." She didn't question, just grabbed the strap and heaved. Inside the bag something clunked, heavy and metal, and something else crackled like old paper. Notebooks. Daniel's notebooks. Echo's file folder. Medical records. Training logs. All of it. All the proof. All the pieces of who Echo was. And who he'd been. The heat screamed behind them as they staggered out the barn doors. Nina collapsed on the grass first. Echo stumbled behind her, then crumpled. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then sirens tore through the night. The fire truck's red glare met the barn's orange fury in a battle of warnings. Water slammed against walls too old to survive, but the barn didn't care. It burned anyway. Firefighters dragged hoses, shouting orders no one heard. One knelt beside Echo, checked his pulse, then looked to Nina. "He's alive," the man said, "but he's out cold." Lena dropped to her knees beside them, cradling Nina, sobbing into her hair. "You could have died." "He went in first," Nina whispered, clutching the scorched training bag to her chest. "He went in for this." When the flames gave in, when the roof caved and the embers hissed into silence, one of the firefighters returned from the blackened shell of what was once Daniel's barn. He held a metal box, half melted but intact. "What's that?" Lena asked. He opened it carefully. Inside, one of Daniel's old wildlife cameras. The SD card still dry, still blinking. They didn't speak until hours later, in the ER's side room, where Echo lay hooked to oxygen with an IV in his paw. Nina sat curled in the chair beside him, soot still smeared across her cheek. The training bag sat on her lap like something sacred. Lena spoke softly, voice raw. "Someone wanted those records gone." Nina nodded slowly. But Echo wouldn't let them. Later that week, when they loaded the camera footage, they'd find it. Not just a face, a hand, striking a match, framing the bag, and closing the door. The footage was grainy. But some truths don't need perfect pixels to burn. Nina sat between Lena and Sheriff Caldwell in the quiet back room of the station. The kind of room meant for grief, not justice. The old flat screen flickered as the deputy hit play for the 5th time. There again, the man in the dark coat, the gas can. The lighter flicked once. He wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't even flinch as the flame caught, because he hadn't expected anyone to survive, and certainly not the dog he'd once tried to erase. "Freeze it," Lena said, voice flat. The screen paused. There, in the corner of the frame, stood the second figure, leaning in, glancing around, gloved hands holding the training bag before placing it just inside the door right where the fire would have swallowed it whole, until Echo dragged it out. Sheriff Caldwell rubbed a hand over his jaw muscles twitching. "Recognize him?" Nina didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the face was clear now. So was the name, Dr. Julian Marlowe. Only that wasn't his name. Caldwell flipped a manila file open and pushed it toward them. Julian Renfield, former director of research at Pharmagene Labs, a defunct biotech facility whose last clinical trial had been under federal investigation. One headline, clipped at the top, read, "Epilepsy Breakthrough or Bioethical Breach. The Controversial Responder Protocol Uncovered." Nina's eyes hovered over the redacted paragraphs until she saw it. Subject R23, male German Shepherd, demonstrates unprecedented response to early neural signal training. Emotional patterning exceeds protocol thresholds. Handler unrecoverable. Memory relinking aborted. R23. Renfield had renamed him Echo. Lena's voice broke the silence. "They said it was to help people with epilepsy. That's what the grant was for." Caldwell nodded grimly. "Until they got caught bypassing humane safeguards. They said dogs like Echo weren't sentient, just neurovessels, experimental tools." He looked directly at Nina. "Your dad, Daniel, knew, didn't he?" Nina's fingers tightened on Echo's folder. Inside was a copy of an early evaluation Form 1 with Daniel's signature, but the rest of the page had been scratched out violently, like someone tried to erase both the dog and the truth in one sweep. "I think he tried to pull Echo out," Nina whispered, but by then it was too late. "Renfield lost everything," Caldwell continued. "Funding, credentials. Then disappeared 5 years ago, until now." He leaned forward, slow and deliberate. "You know what this means, right?" Nina didn't blink. "They'll try again." Outside, the town looked the same. Trucks drove by, flags flapped. The bakery still sold 2 sweet rolls with pink icing, but something had cracked. A lie had surfaced like oil on water and refused to sink again. Back home, Echo lay curled beneath the kitchen table, his breathing slow but steady. Lena knelt beside him, brushing his fur with care. "You weren't just their experiment," she murmured. "You were their warning." From the hallway, Nina called softly. "Mom." Lena looked up. Nina stood holding Daniel's old binder, its cracked leather cover open to the page where Daniel had first written Echo's real name. "Rex, hold the line." Under it, "Change to Echo. Responsive. Traumatized. But there's something still awake." Nina's voice was barely a whisper. "They tried to program obedience." She looked down at the sleeping dog. "But he chose loyalty." The hum of the machines never stopped. Neither did Nina. For 31 hours, she hadn't left the small corner of the county animal clinic's ICU wing. They let her stay only because Echo's vitals dipped dangerously when she stepped outside. So she stayed, curled on the cracked vinyl bench, legs tucked under the blanket someone left from the fire station. Her hand pressed gently against the cage's bars, 2 fingers resting in the space between. Inside, Echo lay motionless, a web of tubes trailing from his side like threads anchoring him to life. His fur still smelled faintly of smoke. The gauze along his left flank hadn't been changed yet. No one had dared to move him. Outside the clinic window, the sun dragged itself behind the ridge. Another day folded shut like the training notes in her lap. Lena sat beside her now, softer than she had been in weeks. No more arguments, no more caution, just pages. She read quietly from Daniel's notebook, the one with the torn corner and faded ink. her voice low, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. A real bond isn't about command, it's about return. You ask, they answer. But the great ones, they come back before you call. Echo didn't move, but Nina whispered anyway. You came back for me. Her voice was raw from smoke, but steady. I'm staying for you. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the old tin, the one she had carried to the auction. Dented now, still smelled like pennies and dust. She opened it slowly. Inside, a folded photo. A faded leash. A crumpled post-it note from Daniel that once read, "Trust begins in silence." She placed the leash beside Echo's cage. You're not a project. You're not broken. She blinked hard. You're mine. Hours passed like fog, quiet, thick, hard to measure. A nurse entered once to check Echo's IV. She paused when she saw the girl still sitting there. You can rest, honey. Nina didn't move. Lena gave a tired smile. We're fine here. The nurse nodded and left without another word. Later, somewhere near midnight, Lena laid her hand on Nina's shoulder. I wish he could hear you. Nina looked up. He can. The monitor beeped. Just once, just sharper. And then, Echo's right eye fluttered. A blink. Then another. His ears didn't perk. His chest didn't rise fast. But the tiniest flicker ran through his tail. Just once. A thump, like a promise returning from somewhere deep inside. Nina gasped, covered her mouth, then leaned forward until her forehead touched the bars. I saw that, she whispered. Don't think I didn't. She pulled the old leash closer to him, slipping it through the grate so the leather brushed against his paw. His eyes moved. Not much, but they moved, looking at her, looking through her, like he remembered, like he stayed. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Quietly, without needing to explain, she reached over and picked up another of Daniel's notebooks. This one had a coffee stain on the cover. She opened to a marked page. If a dog breaks protocol but follows love, let him. It means he remembers something deeper than the drill. She read it aloud, voice quivering, then looked up at her daughter. You really are his girl. Nina didn't answer. She just smiled, eyes red, hands still through the bars. Outside the ICU window the wind shifted, and somewhere in the dark something flickered, not just a life, but the fire inside it. Echo was still here, still fighting, and this time he wasn't doing it alone. The knock came softly, like someone who didn't want to intrude on something sacred. It was mid-morning, and the barn still smelled faintly of smoke and antiseptic. Echo had been released the day before, walking slowly but with intention, his steps careful, as if each one measured what it meant to be alive. Nina looked up from brushing his fur. The old tin leash looped around her wrist, like a promise she refused to take off. Lena opened the door. 2 figures stood outside. No black suits, no polished shoes, no rehearsed smiles, just mud-caked boots, windbreaker jackets with a stitched patch that read, Service Dog Alliance. The woman introduced herself as Erin Reyes, former canine handler, now regional director of the SDA. Beside her was a tall man named Kael Dawson, a pediatric occupational therapist who specialized in trauma-informed animal bonding. They didn't bring brochures. They brought questions, and they listened. Erin knelt slowly near Echo, letting him sniff her fingers. She didn't reach for his head, didn't test his obedience, just watched how his ears tilted toward Nina when she spoke. "I heard about the fire," Aaron said softly. "And the footage," Kael added. "Julian Renfield. We thought he disappeared 5 years ago." Nina stiffened. Lena moved closer. "We've handled it," Lena said carefully. Aaron nodded. "You shouldn't have had to. That wasn't your battle. But what you've done here, what this dog and this girl have become, is something we've never seen." She looked at Echo, then at Nina. "You didn't train him to serve you. You met him where he was and let him find his way back." Nina looked down. Her fingers played with a loose thread on Echo's collar. "He wasn't supposed to be anyone's dog anymore," she whispered. "But he looked at me like I was the only thing he remembered." Kael knelt now, too, his voice gentle. "We've worked with over 200 matched cases, autism, epilepsy, PTSD. But what you've done is something we've been theorizing for years." He opened a folder. Inside were hand-sketched diagrams. A pairing model. Like for like. Wounded mirrors. Children with invisible conditions paired with dogs who've survived the same. "You've already proved it works," Kael said. Echo didn't just learn to respond. He taught himself how to anticipate. Aaron stepped forward. "We'd like to help you rebuild. Officially, funded, structured, but only on one condition." Nina's heart paused. Aaron smiled. "You lead it." Lena nearly dropped the mug she was holding. "What?" Aaron looked at her kindly. "I know she's only 10, but Daniel Quinn's daughter has already built something professionals twice her age couldn't." She turned to Nina. "We don't want Echo. We want his story, and we want you to teach us how it happened." Lena sat down on the bench, hard. There was a long silence. Then she laughed. A short, surprised kind of laugh that cracked through tension like sunlight through barn slats. "I don't think I've let myself believe in tomorrow for years." She looked at Nina. "But maybe it's time we did." That afternoon, Echo walked the perimeter of the barn with Aaron and Kael. Nina sat in the grass, flipping through Daniel's notebook. She was looking for something. A sentence. A sign. She stopped on a page. It wasn't in her father's handwriting. It was hers. From the week he passed. "I want to do what he did. I want to make dogs whole again." She hadn't remembered writing it, but now it felt like a seed that had finally bloomed. Lena stepped beside her, holding a new notebook. This one was blank. She handed it over. "You might need this soon." Nina looked up. "Why?" Lena smiled. "Because the world's going to ask how you did it, and you're going to need more than coffee tins and torn-up commands." From the edge of the yard, Echo barked once, not loud, just enough. He was watching Wyatt's little sister toddle toward the edge of the sandbox. Echo stepped in front of her, blocking gently with his body. No command, no leash, just instinct. Kael pointed. "That right there?" He turned to Aaron. "That's the future of our program." Aaron nodded, then glanced back at the barn. "No," she said softly. "That's the beginning of something bigger." It started with a hammer. A small, chipped one from the back of someone's truck. The first nail hit like knocking on something sacred, then more hands joined. Half the town by sundown. Daniel Quinn's old barn was gone, burned down, nothing left but scorched beams. In its place rose not just a structure, but a promise. The Echo House. Wyatt's sister painted the sign on salvaged wood. Echo House. Where second chances learn to speak. Veterans laid the foundation, Teens painted the walls, and Officer Reuben dug trenches for fencing without being asked. "We don't forget who saved our kids," he said. On the second day, Nina placed the cornerstone, a river stone from where Daniel once trained dogs, etched into it, "For Daniel Quinn, who taught them all to come home." Echo sat beside her, silent, steady. Inside, the barn became a haven. Soft mats, sensory corners, obstacle courses designed for trust, not obedience. In the center, a couch, journal table, and circle of chairs, a space for those forgotten to find one another. That night, people gathered on the porch. Stories, songs, and quiet gratitude filled the air. Nina listened, Echo at her side. When asked what came next, she answered, "We matched the forgotten with the left behind." And so they did. Echo returned the next morning, stepping out of the van with a limp, his fur patchy but his eyes alive. Nina approached slowly, as Daniel had taught. "Let them come to you when they're afraid." At the porch, Echo leaned into her chest. She inhaled the familiar scent, hay, antiseptic, and something uniquely him. "You're home," she whispered. Inside, he found his mat stitched from Daniel's old uniform, ringed with names of every child he'd helped. He lowered himself onto it, exhaled, and stayed. Nina fastened a new vest. Heart. Not service dog, not in training, just that, because that's what he was now, the breath between fear and courage. Wyatt visited, watching Echo lie still. He sat beside him. No words, no rush. Echo let his paw rest on the boy's shoe. A start. Then came Owen, 8 years old, big brown eyes that never quite met yours. Non-verbal for nearly a year. His mother arrived heavy with exhaustion and hope's last thread. Nina guided them along Daniel's old garden path. Echo waited inside, unmoving until Nina gave the sign. He approached Owen slowly, lay down, exposed, vulnerable. Owen's fingers hovered, then barely touched Echo's paw. The dog's tail swept the floor once. The session unfolded in breath and stillness. When a seizure threatened, Echo acted, placing himself across Owen's lap, anchoring him, bringing him back. No commands, just instinct. And then, from Owen, a sound. Echo. His mother wept. Nina wept. Echo stayed calm, unshaken. That night, Nina sat beside him on the porch. The cracked wind chime above rang out a single, imperfect note, like a boy's first word, like a dog's first instinct returning, like a beginning. It started with a knock. Not the kind that came with boots on wood or voices behind doors, but with a pale envelope shoved through the Echo House's mailbox. No return address, just 4 clean lines, typed in all caps, taped to the front. Legal claim for recovery. Property. Designation, Experimental Subject 7E, Echo. Lena read it first. Her hands trembled before she got halfway through. Nina, coming in from the garden with soil on her knees, didn't understand right away. Not until Lena sat her down and read the words aloud. Julian Renfield. Formerly. Julian Marlowe asserts intellectual property rights over Echo based on proprietary neurological work developed under Grant Code PG 401. Due to a pending federal appeal, Echo is considered biological evidence until further review. Nina stared at her mother. They're calling him evidence? Lena couldn't speak. The news spread faster than Nina's heartbeat. By morning, local reporters circled the fence like flies on heat. Microphones pointed at the barn. Flashbulbs snapped when Nina tried to feed Echo in peace. And on every screen, from cheap gas station TVs to the tablet in the school library, one face returned like a ghost from the fire. Julian Renfield, hair slicked, tie flawless, words cold. Echo, he said into the cameras, was a crucial part of our early epilepsy response research. The child's involvement, while touching, doesn't negate the intellectual framework under which he was conditioned. We have paperwork. Paperwork. That word echoed in Nina's chest louder than any seizure alert or gavel. She didn't cry, not at first. She got mad. And then she wrote. By the next day, Lena's kitchen table had transformed into a command center. Letters piled like snowdrifts from parents, teachers, therapists, some handwritten in pencil by children Echo had helped. When Echo lay next to me, my brain stopped hurting. Wyatt. I want to be like Nina when I grow up, not scared, brave. Olivia. This dog made my son say mama again. Dr. Elisa Chen, pediatric neurologist. Local veterans stopped by with their own testimony. He responded faster than my trained canine ever did, and he limps for God's sake. You can't patent loyalty. Nina didn't sleep much. She sat with Echo every night, watching the barn lights buzz and flicker under camera glare. Once she whispered, "They think you're a file." Echo, half asleep, pressed his nose into her palm and let out a sigh that sounded like the end of a long story. The town didn't wait for orders. They made banners. Let Echo stay. Not a patent, a partner. Kids chalked paw prints down Main Street. Retired officers held a silent walk through town with their old dogs beside them. On Thursday, the mayor called a town hall. We don't have the jurisdiction, she admitted, but we do have voices. That night, hundreds showed. Nina stood behind the podium, Echo by her side in a vest stitched with scars and a child's drawing. She looked smaller than the crowd expected. But her voice? It didn't shake. You can't file a patent on someone who saved your life. The video of her speech went viral within hours, uploaded by a teenager on TikTok, retweeted by a senator's aide, shared by an epilepsy awareness page, then reshared by a canine therapy foundation. Then a national news anchor quoted it, "You can't file a patent on someone who saved your life." Hashtag Let Echo Stay trended for 3 days. Renfield responded. He sent 2 more lawyers, court dates, threats, and an official motion, temporary removal of Subject 7E pending bioethical review. But by then, the world was watching. And Echo stayed. Because Nina had already decided, this is not just about a dog. She looked the lawyer in the eye. This is about who gets to decide what healing looks like. And that no envelope could claim. The morning the letter arrived, the house was silent. Lena stood by the window, the envelope open in her hand. The letterhead was embossed in deep green, American Board of Animal-Assisted Interventions. At the bottom, an invitation. We invite Nina Cassidy and her companion dog Echo to speak at the 17th National Therapy Canine Summit in Denver, Colorado, under the theme Redefining Ability. Lena sat down slowly, as if the chair had grown unfamiliar. Across the room, Nina blinked, then whispered, "They want to hear from us?" But the second page changed everything. Due to concerns regarding the animal's chronic neurological condition, we are obliged to open a round table on the ethics of his participation in ongoing therapy work. This session will be held as part of the summit program. In other words, was Echo too broken to belong? The panel was set for Saturday. Doctors, therapists, trainers, bioethicists. Some praised Echo's instinct. Others voiced concern. Repeated stimulation may worsen his seizures. Is this emotionally sustainable for the child? What precedent do we set, letting a failed dog into service? That phrase stung. Failed dog. But Nina sat still. She waited. And when they finally called her name, she didn't bring a speech. She brought Echo. She walked slowly onto the stage, the bright conference lights reflecting off Echo's dull vest. The audience leaned forward, some with curiosity, some with caution. Echo moved beside her, deliberate but steady, his limp visible but controlled. His gaze swept the crowd, not with fear, but with quiet readiness. Nina reached the mic. She didn't clear her throat, didn't shuffle papers. She just looked at Echo, then spoke. "My name is Nina Cassidy. I'm 10. I'm not a scientist, but I know something about limits." She held up a page torn from her father's old notebook, laminated now, smudged with age. "A good dog doesn't follow commands. A good dog follows need." My dad wrote that. He trained hundreds of canines before he died. She touched Echo's head. He closed his eyes under her fingers. "When I found Echo, he didn't eat. He didn't move. They said he was unfit. But Echo didn't forget how to serve. He just forgot how to be seen." Silence. Then a quiet gasp from someone in the third row when Echo, unprompted, placed his paw gently across Nina's shoe. Not a trick. Not a command, just memory, just choice. Nina went on. "I'm not using Echo, I'm working with Echo. He knows when a child is about to panic. He knows when a seizure is coming. No one taught him that. He learned it because he lives it." She paused, looked directly at the panel. "You ask if he's too sick to help, but maybe he helps because he's been sick. Maybe some kids don't need a perfect dog." She steadied herself. "They need one that understands what it means to be scared and come back anyway." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. It leaned in. Afterward, a woman in a navy blazer approached Nina in the hallway. She was head of the summit's ethics board. Her badge gleamed. Dr. Eloise Marin, VMD, PhD. She crouched to Echo's level, her eyes not assessing but softened. "I've reviewed 26 cases this year," she said. "All spotless, flawless, predictable." She looked up at Nina. "Echo's the first I've seen that made a child stand taller just by standing beside them." Nina didn't answer right away. She just placed her hand over Echo's rib cage, where his breathing shivered. "He's not just a dog," she whispered. "He's a mirror." By the next morning, the summit committee issued a formal statement. "We recognize Echo as a model of resilience-based therapy and formally endorse his continued work under the Cassidy Protocol, effective immediately." They gave the protocol a name, but everyone knew who it belonged to. That night, Nina and Lena sat under the stars outside the motel, takeaway fries between them. Echo lay on the gravel, his head on Nina's boot. Lena said softly, "You know, even your dad never got invited to speak at that summit." Nina smiled faintly. "He's probably yelling at the stars right now." "You brought the wrong Cassidy." They both laughed. "And Echo?" He thumped his tail once because he knew they didn't come to prove he could still serve. They came to prove he never stopped. The courthouse smelled of old paper and floor polish. Morning light filtered through high windows, casting long bars across the benches like silent witnesses. Nina sat at the front, her legs dangling just above the floor, Echo lying at her feet like a shadow that chose to stay. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, families. and somewhere in the back Lena, clutching Daniel's notebook like scripture. The judge, a woman with hair the color of worn marble, adjusted her glasses as she leafed through the last page of the ruling. Her voice was steady, neutral, but not cold. The matter before this court concerns not just ownership, but definition. Is Echo a canine diagnosed with neurological trauma and recovered through a child-led therapy program a thing to be owned, or a partner in care? A hush fell over the room, not even a pen scratched. This court has reviewed arguments from the plaintiff, Dr. Julian Renfield, formerly of Pharmagene Laboratories, and from the defense, represented by Nina Cassidy, minor, through her guardian and counsel. She glanced briefly at Nina, then down at Echo. The decision is as follows. Nina didn't breathe. She didn't dare. Echo shifted only slightly, resting his chin atop the toe of her sneaker. His ears remained flat, still, listening. This court hereby rules that Echo is not the property of Pharmagene Labs, nor of any corporate entity past or present. He is not a product nor a byproduct of failed medical research. A rustle of whispers. He is, henceforth, protected under a newly recognized designation, sentient therapy asset, with full ethical consideration and protection similar to that of a service animal in active therapeutic partnership. Nina blinked. The room exhaled. The judge continued, "This classification recognizes the unique, voluntary, and responsive contributions made by therapy animals not as tools, but as collaborative presences in human healing. Ownership rights are voided. Echo remains, permanently and lawfully, with Nina Cassidy." The gavel didn't just fall. It landed like thunder. For a moment the world tilted, before Nina felt Echo shift beside her, lift his head, and nudge her hand with his nose. A thank you. A home. Outside, the cameras flashed. Microphones surged forward. Voices called, "Nina, how does it feel? Is Echo really okay after everything? Will you testify in the Pharmagene inquiry?" But Nina didn't answer. She knelt, placed her forehead gently against Echo's. "He's not just okay," she whispered. "He's free." Then Lena gently placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered something even quieter. "Your dad would have called this a new command." Nina smiled, through tears she hadn't realized were falling. A better one. By nightfall, the headlines rolled out across the country. Court recognizes Echo as sentient therapy. Asset Nina Cassidy's case sets legal precedent. Redfield flees following court loss. Federal probe into Pharmagene underway. A girl, a dog, and a new definition of healing. The real story, of course, was quieter. Echo slept beside Nina that night on the barn porch. A breeze rolling across the field, where kids now came for sessions every Tuesday and Thursday. His breathing was slow, uneven, but steady. Lena brought out 2 mugs of cocoa, one for herself, one for Nina, who had stayed awake beside him. She didn't speak at first. She just watched Nina stroke Echo's scarred ear, the one that never quite stood upright. Then, finally, "Did you ever think," Lena asked, "that the dog nobody wanted would end up changing the law?" Nina didn't look away from Echo. "I didn't bring him back," she said softly. "He chose to stay," Lena smiled. "That's exactly why he's yours." The mornings at Echo House always began the same way. No whistles, no barked orders, just the creak of the barn doors and the sound of small feet, some in sneakers, some in wheelchairs, some nearly silent. But Echo always knew. His ears perked, head lifting, scanning for the one who needed him most. Nina stood by the chalkboard, greeting each child gently. She'd learned that some flinched at sudden moves, others avoided eye contact. Some didn't speak, not because they couldn't, but because they were still deciding if the world deserved their voice. That was okay. Echo taught her that trust didn't bark. It breathed. "Today," Nina said, kneeling beside 5 kids, "we're going to practice asking without speaking." Wyatt raised his hand. "With our hands?" "Sometimes. Sometimes with your breath. Sometimes with your heartbeat. Dogs like Echo don't just hear noise. They feel who you are." She handed them folded cloths and treat pouches, then brought Echo forward. His gait was slow but steady, one leg pulling slightly from the old fire injury. He paused before Zoe, the girl who hid behind her hoodie. Nina stepped back. Zoe dropped the cloth and looked down. Echo stayed still. Then, slowly, her fingers stretched out, palm up. Echo lowered his head, touched her hand with his nose, and thumped his tail once. Zoe's small smile was easy to miss, but Nina saw it. Later, as they practiced posture, a boy asked, "What if I can't stop shaking?" Nina answered, "Then you teach him how to stay calm anyway. Sometimes it's the broken parts that make you easier to understand." They worked in pairs. Sometimes Echo, sometimes other dogs rescued strays now trained for therapy. Afterward, Zoe lingered. "He trusts you," Nina said. "But I didn't do anything," Zoe whispered. "You didn't try to do anything. Sometimes that's what trust needs. Can I come back tomorrow?" Echo just asked the same thing. The barn's rhythm had changed. No more drills or harsh commands, just quiet, stillness, where whispers mattered more than orders. Echo, once a faster dog, was now steadier, his offbeat gait like a song with a broken measure that somehow made the melody more human. On Tuesdays, sunlight filled the barn like gold dust. That day they brought no toys, just Echo to Ava, a girl with a scarf over her bare scalp, too afraid to sleep. Echo entered without a leash, settled beside her, paw outstretched but not touching. He closed his eyes and waited. Minutes passed. Ava's heartbeat slowed. Echo exhaled. Her shoulders eased and her hand moved an inch closer. By the 10th minute they breathed together, the room filled only with peace. Later, Echo curled on his mat, tired but calm. Lena brought him water. "He's pacing himself," Nina said softly. "And honoring it," Lena replied. That night, Echo had a mild seizure. What amazed Nina was how he walked to the emergency pillow, curled down, as if he knew. Nina whispered, as Daniel once had, "You're safe. You're seen. I'm here." In the morning, Nina updated the chalkboard. Half sessions only. Healing wasn't about going back to how things were. It was about showing up as you are. Echo still showed up steady breath in a sharp-edged world. Then one day, visitors arrived. A nervous father, Marcus. A boy, Drew, hoodie up, nails chewed raw. Drew hadn't spoken in months, hadn't made eye contact, and he'd been hurting himself. But late one night, he'd watched a video Echo calming a girl during a seizure, and whispered, "I want to meet him." Echo entered, no leash, no command. He lay down near Drew, close enough but not too close. Drew stared. Echo blinked, slow, twice a signal of trust. No words, no miracles. But at the end, Drew left his hoodie behind. They came back. Again and again. By the 4th visit, Drew sat next to Echo. By the sixth, 2 fingers rested on the dog's shoulder. By the 7th, no fresh marks on his arms. Before leaving, Marcus pulled Nina aside. "I'm not asking to take him, but could we learn? Build something like this back home?" They'd found a barn, rallied a support group. They wanted to call it the Echo Project. Before they left, Drew knelt, forehead to Echo's, and whispered, "Thank you for hearing me." That night, Nina wrote in Daniel's journal, "Today, Echo helped a child stop hurting, not with medicine or words. Just presence, just trust." The Echo House was never about one dog. It was about what happens when someone finally listens. And maybe that's how it spreads, not like wildfire, but like a heartbeat, one child at a time. The snow didn't fall hard that morning. It came in soft swirls, dancing like breath made visible. Frost Haven's main square had been cleared for the event benches, dusted, space shoveled, a simple wooden stage erected beside the steps of the old library. No banners, no confetti, just folding chairs, quiet hearts, and a line of boot prints leading up to a microphone. The air was hushed, like the town knew not to interrupt. This wasn't a celebration built on spectacle. It was built on survival, on second chances, on names whispered between seizures and scars, and one of those names was Echo. The first class of junior handlers stood in a neat line behind Nina. 10 children, all different, some with autism, some with epilepsy, others with anxiety so deep their shoulders hadn't fully relaxed in years. But here they stood tall. Each wore a light blue scarf, knotted once around their neck, the same shade as the ribbon Echo used to wear when he first began working beside Nina. Echo stood now, too, by her side, still limping slightly, but his stance was proud, coat groomed, collar polished, and his eyes, they gleamed. Nina stepped to the mic. Her voice didn't waver. "Today is not about a miracle dog," she began. "It's about the children who refused to be statistics, the families who chose faith over fear, the quiet ones who spoke in touches, and those who learned to listen." She paused. Her eyes scanned the small crowd. Neighbors, friends, doctors. Even 2 firefighters who had pulled Echo from the burning barn now stood in the back, their hats pressed against their chests. In every one of these handlers is a story, a breath they almost didn't catch, a night they almost didn't make it through. Her voice softened. And in every one of these dogs is something science still can't explain, an understanding that transcends commands. She turned slightly, looking at Echo. And in one dog is the echo of a man who never gave up teaching, even after he was gone. There was no applause, only stillness. And in the middle row, Lena reached for a tissue. On the seat beside her sat a framed photograph. Daniel, smiling in uniform, wind catching the corner of his jacket. Nina had placed it there herself, facing the stage, so he wouldn't miss a thing. Mayor Hartley, once skeptical, now a believer, stepped forward next, holding a small navy blue box. Inside, a hand-stitched ribbon, edged in silver thread, and attached to it a gold medallion bearing the insignia of the National Therapy Canine Corps. "Presented not for service," she said quietly, "but for heart." Echo didn't move when Nina knelt, but when she opened the box and placed the medal gently around his neck, he turned his head just slightly to nuzzle her shoulder. The crowd drew breath as one. No cue, no trick, just understanding. Then, One by one, each child walked forward, and with hands that once trembled or hid behind parents' legs, they each touched Echo, a palm to his chest, a whisper of thanks, a silent nod. Even Owen, now speaking full sentences, leaned in close and said, "He makes me brave." And Echo? He stayed still, but his tail swept slowly through the snow behind him. After the ceremony, as chairs were packed up and cocoa was passed around in paper cups, Lena stayed in her seat. She didn't need to move, didn't want to. She looked at the photograph beside her and whispered, "They remembered, Daniel. All of it. Even the parts you never wrote down." A snowflake landed on the glass, then another. And in the hush of the town square, for one quiet moment, she swore she could hear his laugh on the wind. That night, Echo's medal hung from a hook in the barn turned center, not locked away, not displayed in glass, just there, where any child who walked in scared could reach up and touch it, where they could feel the weight of something that once saved a life, and was now saving more. Autumn came early to Frost Haven that year, not with the drama of storms, but with the quiet dignity of change leaves turning in slow confession, wind moving like breath over old earth. The air held that crisp hush, the kind that makes you slow your steps without meaning to. Echo had slowed too. His legs, once taut with silent command, now trembled after longer walks. His breath, once deep and steady, sometimes caught when the nights dipped cold. But he never missed a call. Not Nina's. Not ever. That morning, he didn't rise with the others. Lena was the first to notice. She stood by the kitchen window, sipping tea in the light of the rising sun, when she realized the garden was still. No paw prints, no soft snort at the gate, just a golden patch beneath the maple tree, and Echo lying in it, head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed, as if still listening. Nina came barefoot. She didn't run, didn't cry. She walked the way you walk toward something sacred. Each step pressed softly into the earth, barely disturbing the leaves scattered across the stone path. She knelt beside him, tucking her knees under her like she had as a little girl when she used to sit beside Daniel's boots. "Echo," she said gently. His ear twitched. Only once. Then his tail moved, barely a thump, barely audible, but it moved. Nina smiled through her tears. "That's my boy." She rested her palm on his chest, feeling the rise and fall that had once synchronized with her nightmares, her hopes, her heartbeat. "I think you knew," she whispered. The breeze stirred the maple branches. A few red leaves fell, spiraling in lazy arcs before settling near Echo's paws. "You waited until they graduated, until they didn't need you every day. Until I didn't need to hold on so tightly." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "You taught me how to stay, how to listen, how to trust again." Echo didn't blink. He didn't move. But he was still there, wholly, like he always had been. The sound of the world quieted, and in that hush, Nina leaned closer, placed her forehead gently against his, and said the words only they had ever understood fully. "Guard well, old friend." A final breath. Not labored, just complete. Like an exhale that had waited years. His chest stilled. But Nina didn't move. She stayed long after. The wind shifted, and a beam of light fell through the branches, catching on the curve of Echo's collar. The therapy dog medal glinted once, then dulled in the shadow of the leaves. Lena found them an hour later, She didn't speak. She sat beside her daughter and placed a hand on Nina's back. For a long time, they stayed that way. 3 figures under the maple, one still, one breaking, one bearing witness. No sirens, no ceremony, just silence and love. Later that evening, the children arrived. One by one, as if the wind had whispered to them. They brought stones, flowers, scarves they'd worn during their first sessions. Owen placed a toy stethoscope at Echo's paws. "I said my first word to you," he whispered. "You can keep it." Wyatt folded a piece of lined paper into the shape of a dog. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They buried Echo in the garden, beneath the maple tree where he'd chosen his final rest. Lena carved the words herself into a simple wooden marker. He stayed. And in the days that followed, something strange happened. Echo's bed remained where it had always been, beside the training room door. And some swore they still heard his nails on the old wood floor late at night. Nina never confirmed. She just smiled when asked. Because some guards don't need a body to stand watch. They are presence, memory, the final lesson, not in obedience, but in love. The frost came earlier than usual that year, lacing the windows of the Echo house in delicate patterns that looked like breath, paused mid-air. Inside, the warmth of children's laughter wrapped around the rafters. A boy traced his finger across a wooden beam, engraved with names Daniels at the top, followed by Echoes. Below them, newer ones, kids, mentors, therapy dogs, each one etched not for perfection, but for presence. In the garden, the maple tree stood bare, its branches dark against the gray sky. But beneath it, the plaque remained, untouched by season. He didn't bark loud. He just listened harder than anyone ever had. Visitors often stopped there, expecting sorrow. But what they found was peace. The model Nina and Echo built, the unspoken choreography between child and dog, the emphasis on mirrored breath, on unforced connection, had spread far beyond Frost Haven. By spring, it was in 12 states. By summer, translated into 4 languages. And Nina, now 16, sat behind a desk facing a camera lens from her modest office. Her voice was clear, soft, confident. Every dog has a pace. Every child has a rhythm. Our job is to stop trying to speed either up. Behind her on the wall, a photo. Echo, lying beside a sleeping girl. The only sound in the frame was stillness itself. The webinars grew, not viral-rooted. International educators tuned in not for spectacle, but for sincerity. Nina didn't speak in buzzwords. She spoke in pauses, in lived truth. She spoke of the first time Echo wouldn't eat, of the command he remembered, of the way he'd stood between a boy and a panic attack without needing a word. She taught that silence could be a kind of fluency, and the world listened. In the waiting rooms of new Echo centers, from Vermont to New Zealand, families sat beside bronze statues cast in gentle detail. Not heroic, not militant, just real. A shepherd with one ear flopped forward, paws crossed like he was still listening. Some children would pet the statue before their first session. Some whispered secrets into the still metal fur. Some placed treats at its feet, and in every center, just beyond the lobby, was a small quote burned into reclaimed wood. He stayed. Lena watched from the window as the first snow began to fall. Nina was out back, kneeling beside the marker, brushing away leaves from Echo's resting place. She wasn't crying, she was humming, a low, even melody Daniel used to whistle when calming anxious pups. Lena stepped outside, bundled in her father's old coat, and called gently, "He'd be proud, you know." Nina didn't turn, just nodded. I think he already knew. One night, months later, a child named Miriam came for her first visit. She didn't speak, didn't make eye contact. She walked into the center like a shadow. But when she entered the therapy room, she paused. She looked toward the corner and whispered, "Echo." Nina turned. There was no dog in the room, only the statue. Miriam walked toward it, sat down, placed her hand against the bronze, and smiled. Some legacies are loud measured in headlines, medals, and acclaim. Others are quiet, measured in footsteps that slow, in children who sleep through the night, in a bronze shepherd with eyes that never blink, but always watch. Because Echo never left. He simply taught the world how to stay. In a world that often moves too fast to listen, sometimes it takes a dog to remind us how to be still, how to truly see each other. Echo was never just a therapy dog. He was a mirror for broken hearts, a bridge for quiet children, and a guardian for truths no one else could reach. Through Nina's unwavering love and Daniel's legacy, we witnessed how compassion, patience, and trust can transform pain into purpose. This isn't just a story about a German shepherd. It's about what happens when we stop measuring value by perfection and start honoring presence, connection, and quiet courage. The Echo House may be fictional, but its message is very real. Every life matters, every dog has a story worth hearing, and every child deserves to feel safe, understood, and seen. So the next time you pass by a dog with tired eyes or a child who speaks in silence, pause, watch, listen. Because sometimes the ones who change the world don't wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four legs and simply stay. To Echo, and every animal who's ever guarded a soul instead of a gate, thank you. You were never just a dog. You were